So I think we're going to begin. My name is Gage Counts. I'm going to be moderating the debate and making sure that they both stay within their time limits, which I know I will have to do because they won't enforce themselves. So the discussion that we're going to be having tonight is over the question of libertarianism and Catholic social teaching, and the prompt is Catholic social thought and libertarianism, friends or foes. Walter Block is going to be taking the friend position, and Father Vosik will likely be taking the foe position. Walter Block is an economics professor here at Loyola, and Father Vosik is a professor in the religious studies department here. Catholic studies, or there's some overlap. What prompted this debate was an exchange they had in the Maroon a month or two ago, where they fleshed this out in a very entertaining exchange. So you can find that on the Maroon's website. So the structure of the debate today is going to be divided into 2-minute opening speeches for 15 minutes each, starting with Father Vosik. Then they're both going to have an opportunity to respond to each other with, let me remind myself what the time is, 10 minutes. Then they'll both have 5 minutes for concluding remarks, and then we'll open the discussion to all of you. And as another note, the original announcement said that this would end at around 10, and that's way too late. It's probably going to end more around probably 8:55, maybe 9 at this point. So we'll begin with Father Vosik making the opening remarks.
Thank you. And the reason we're ending earlier is because I have Mass to say at 9 o'clock, and so I have to be elsewhere. First, it's a pleasure to be here, okay? And I wanted to begin. I look forward to this as a kind of intellectual exchange. We call it a debate, but I think it's more a disagreement, and we're here in the search for the truth. I'd like to begin with two texts, or two sources of text. This is just for fun, or maybe not so much fun, but the first one comes from Charles Koch, the Koch brothers, who are well known as libertarians, okay? And so I begin with text from them, so if I may do so. It says, to be truly successful, one that excels, a person that excels, or an organization that excels and stands the test of time, virtue as well as talent must be emphasized. And it goes on to say, the importance of free societies is how they increase the well-being for the overwhelming majority of people. So one of my first claims is going to be, Professor Block is not a very good libertarian, okay? So, but libertarian in the Koch variety, because I'm going to talk about virtue and I'm going to talk about societies, and Professor Block says quite clearly when he's talking about drugs, it doesn't make any sense to talk about the well-being of society. It just doesn't make any good sense. We can talk about the well-being of individuals, but society, what is that? It doesn't exist. So that's the first text that I want to read. So the second text is more my world, and I said to you earlier that I'm going to be doing Mass tonight, or Eucharist tonight, and it just so happened that the text that we have for tonight is the one that I'm about to read from the Acts. So it says, the community of believers were of one heart and mind, and no one claimed that any possessions was his own or her own. But they had everything in common. There was no needy person among them, for those who owned property or houses would sell them, bring the proceeds of the sale, and put them at the feet of the apostles, and they were distributed to each according to need. That's from Luke's Acts of the Apostles. Now, that particular text, just to make life more complicated, is a great description of one kind of libertarianism. There are different kinds of libertarianism. Professor Block has one kind, and there are other kinds that insist that freedom is important, but it really requires that we share all things in common and that there be no private property. And so between Professor Block's there must be private property and another form of libertarianism, there need not be any form of private property, there's going to be considerable kind of a disagreement here, just even on libertarian grounds, all right? I'm not going to be a libertarian particularly by any means, but I want to start off with the fact that we've got a confusing topic. The confusing topic is what, pray tell, is libertarianism? And I'm going to leave Dr. Block the privilege of talking about that. I'm pretty sure from many conversations I've had with him that he doesn't understand Christianity. And he, I'm sure, is pretty sure from our many conversations that I don't understand libertarianism. And so we've got the great dilemma tonight of whether we're going to be ships passing in the night. I hope not. But, I've spent the last 2 days trying to catch up on libertarianism, but it's still a baffling subject to me. And one of the things that I say to my students from time to time is, well, libertarian, and they say, oh, no, that's Dr. Block's libertarianism. Most libertarians don't hold that, okay? And so I say, okay, well, you know better than I, and there we are. Okay, so we've got different kinds of views. One of the things that I read in Wikipedia is for 44 pages about maybe 50 different kinds of disagreements within libertarianism. So again, there's great disparity. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about at first, at least the opening part, is not about libertarianism so much as what is a Christian view of social thought. And as soon as I say that, those of you who are in the know would say, okay, you're just about to make the same mistake that you just said Dr. Block is making. In other words, there is no such thing as what all Christians hold. There's a lot of different disagreement among Christians. So are Christians in favor of freedom as I am? Yes. Oh, no. Yes? No. There's a strand of Christianity that talks about the bondage of the will, and we're not really free. Do Christianities believe in the individuals, or do Christianities believe in society? There are some who emphasize one, some who emphasize other. Do Christians believe that all people are going to go to heaven? Some do, and other people say, no, most people are going to go to hell. So there's enormous disparity in Christianity too. So I'm admittedly taking but one view of Christianity here. And some would say, well, you're not a very good Christian. And I say, okay, well, that's the nature of the discussion. Okay. So first thing now, so I'm now starting more positively rather than setting just the background. The first thing has to do with where do you start? How do you get started in reflecting on these kinds of matters? Well, one way to do so, different than Dr. Block's, I think, one way to do so is you start with the human person. Now, he's, I think, going to say, wait a minute, I start with the human person. Maybe or maybe not. When at least the typical descriptions of libertarianism get going, they say that the first thing we need to say is we own ourselves. And notice the metaphor that's under there, property. So this basic image of human life is that we're property. We own ourselves, but it's a thing kind of mentality that says we are our own property. And therefore, hey, if I have a house, can I burn it down? Sure, I can burn my own house down. If I have a property, if I have a body, can I kill it? Yeah, it's my own property. Can I kill myself? Yeah, it's my own property. If I am the kind of person who wants to build it up, that's fine. But if I'm not the kind of person who doesn't want to build it up, that's not fine. That's also fine. So when you talk about property and ownership as the first thing you say, I think you get off on a bad foot. That would be my first thing. Second thing to say with respect to that, when we're talking about Christian ethics, there's usually Christian ethics is usually complicated, and I think Dr. Block's and certainly much libertarian thought is not very complicated. It's just real simple. You just take one view and then you hold on to that. And okay, I can appreciate the beauty of the simplicity. And many of the things that are supported by libertarianism are supported by Christianity, but Christianity just is so much more complicated and confusing and so forth, and it's trying to be adequate to a much larger reality. So one of the things that Christianity does is ask two questions at the very outset. Not only who am I, not who owns me, but who am I? And the second question is whose am I, which is probably going to be misunderstood if it's thought in terms of property. So it asks the question, well, to whom do I belong? And if I say such things as, well, my wife or my friend, that's not a possession kind of a concern. It's a relational kind of a concern. So when Christians ask, whose am I, or what are my relationships, an essential part of understanding what it means to be a Christian is, well, I'm related to God. Now, that's not God owns me, I own God, terrible kind of language, but rather the language is one of, well, to whom do I belong? And without relationships, you've got an inadequate understanding of what it means to be a human being. So the first thing is this dual question of to whom do I belong? And of course, the Christian answer is not very satisfying to anybody who isn't a religious person. But the Christian answer is I belong to God. And if I could do my own heretical version of Christianity, God belongs to me. Language that we use is that we're in a friendship with God, or language we use is that we're in a covenant with God. And there are a relationship that puts demands upon God and relationships that put demands upon us. And that sense of community, that sense of relationship is central to understanding. So we don't start with an isolated self and then say, maybe I will have a friend, or we don't start with an isolated self and say, maybe I will go and relate to God. We already belong to God, and we already belong to a social world, and a whole variety of different kinds of conceptions. So one of the major images of Christianity is that of a family. Sometimes we talk about God as mother, sometimes we talk about God as father, but point being and sometimes we talk about ourselves as children of God, and it's a metaphor, clearly a metaphor, but just as in a family, you don't say, I choose my family. Rather, you say, I was raised by the Vosick family, there it is, I'm stuck with it. Now, I can either opt out or I can opt in, but the fact is that the relationship is already pre-given. Now, that is perhaps obvious in the realm of the family. It may be obvious to you in terms of the relationship to God, but the Christian sphere also says, I belong to others. Now, again, not possession, not slavery, but rather I am in relationship to others, and it is up to me to fulfill that relationship. It's an empty relationship, if you will, but there is a demand that I belong to others and that I be in relationship to others. And so when we're talking about human beings, we start with relationships, not of property relationships, not who owns whom, but rather a relationship in the sense of, in what kinds of personal relationships, love relationships, other kinds of relationships, biological relationships, cultural relationships. And so I can say, I'm an American. Now, I can get rid of my Americanism. I can try to do that. And I'm a Vosick, and I can try to do that. And I can certainly abjure the Society of Jesus, and I can get rid of God and all of that. But I start with those, at least some of those, as part of the presupposition. So within that, then, comes, we talk not about the ownership of a person, but we talk rather about the dignity of a person. Now, dignity here is, again, one of those placeholders. It's a placeholder for saying a lot of important things like people are not disposable like things. So when we're talking about dignity, it's in good part a negative word. It's saying it's not this. It's not treat people like other objects. It's treating people in a way that's separate from other objects. That's significant then for the approach of a Christian. But not only the dignity of a human person, other parts that I've already alluded to is we are belongers. And you can't understand a Christian and can't understand a human being without seeing how we belong. Now, very un-American thesis, okay? American thesis is we're individuals, all separate, and if we like to, we can have friends. If we like to, we can relate to God. But hey, as I sometimes say to be outrageous, but actually I think I'm quite accurate, the worst possible sin is to be an atheist. Now, people say, wait a minute, atheism is an option sort of a thing. I say, if you belong to God, if you belong in relationship to God, then if you're missing the most fundamental relationship of your life, then you're really missing big time. Okay, now, again, lots of disagreement on that, but that's the point is if you start with relationship, then that seems to follow. The next thing that comes with respect to all of this is that the kind of the sense of belonging to community. Is there such a thing as community? And again, in an individualistic culture, there is no such thing. There's no such thing as a church, for example. Churches don't exist. There's only individual Christians. In a communal sense, where communities really exist, we sometimes use the language of Scripture, the body of Christ. If in a communal world, then there really are churches, there really are countries, there really are nations. And these have a certain kind of identity, which is analogous to the human identity, and needs to be appreciated as such that I can say with great sadness, the Catholic Church has been failing people a lot. Now, I'm not just talking as oftentimes happens in Rome. They say, oh no, the church is fine. It's just all the Christians are bad, all the Catholics are bad, but the church is fine. Well, no, that kind of distinction seems to me just bogus, because the church at the same time says, oh, the church is completely holy, it's just all of its members are sinful. And you begin to see a distinction there that is without merit, it seems to me. There is a realm of the church and there's a realm of the individual, and each has its own appropriateness. Okay, so something popped there. All right. Now, next I want to go on to, with respect to the one difference between libertarianism, I think, and Christianity, I think, well, I'm pretty sure on the Christianity side, is that in libertarianism there is only negative. 1 minute. Oh, mon Dieu. Well, there's only 1 minute. There's only negative duties. And namely not to harm other people. Christianity has always started with positive duties as well as negative duties. We owe something to one another. We are obligated to help one another. And so to give the example that I gave in the maroon, if in fact I see a person who's been run over by a car, do I have an obligation to help them? And the answer is, my students say, no, you don't have any obligation to help them. And a Christian says, what? You have to help them. When I've asked some of my students who have been influenced by this libertarian view, I say, supposing somebody is really dying in front of you, do you have any? No obligation whatsoever. So there's a world of difference here in terms of the libertarian view and the Christian view, at least on this regard, because Christians recognize all the time various positive duties. And I'm now being shooed off.
Dr. Block will be giving the next 15-minute remarks about what he thinks about it.
My understanding is I'm getting 15 minutes for my opening statement, and then I get 10 minutes to respond to Father Vasek, and then he gets 10 minutes to respond to me, and then we have the summary and then questions. So time me for 15 minutes, and then I'll start in on my criticism of Father Vasek. The question is, are Catholic social thought and libertarianism friends or foes? So it behooves me to first introduce or define both terms. Libertarianism is very simple, not simplistic, but very simple, Occam's razor and all. And what libertarianism says, and the reversions of libertarianism, which I'll get into in my comments, but to me, the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. You can do anything you want, just keep your mitts off of other people without their permission, and keep your mitts off of their possessions. So their person and their property should be inviolate, which means that the only just laws are laws against murder, rape, theft, stealing, fraud, kidnapping, things like that. Libertarianism is a theory of what just law is. That's all it's concerned about, is what is justice in law? What is the proper, just legal system? It's not all things to all people. It's very, very narrowly construed. It only asks, what is a just law? And it says a just law is against murder, rape, and theft, and arson, and things like that. And that's it. There are no other just laws apart from laws that prohibit violence against innocent people. That's it. It's not libertine, Sometimes it's confused with libertinism, which says that you should do drugs or prostitution or stuff like that. It only says that if using drugs or engaging in prostitution does not constitute an uninvited border crossing, does not involve hitting someone, like Father Vacek hit me here with the left. He promised to behave, but he's a vicious man. No, I'm kidding. So with regard to prostitution or drugs, it doesn't say that they're good. It just says that if it's between consenting adults, there should be no law against it. It doesn't mean that libertarians favor it. We are not libertines, although some libertarians are libertines also, but that's separate from libertarianism. We're not conservative. We're not right-wing. I think we're sui generis. We're unique. It's a unique philosophy. Okay, so much for libertarianism. What is my view on Catholic social thought? I say as a Jewish atheist. And my view is I pick one element of it because Catholic social teaching is a many-splendored edifice. There are many aspects to it, but I'm going to focus just on one. And the one I'm going to focus on is the preferential option for the poor. Surely, I imagine my friend Ed would not disagree that the preferential option for the poor is one element of Catholic social teaching, and I'm going to focus on that. And my understanding of it is that whenever you're considering public policy, what you should do is look very carefully at its impact on the poor. Because if it negatively impacts the very rich, well, then they become merely rich. If it negatively impacts the merely rich, not millionaires and billionaires, as Bernie Sanders would say, well, then they become middle class. And if it negatively impacts the middle class, well, then they become poor, which isn't so bad. Much worse would be if it negatively impacts the poor, because then their condition is very dire. That is, in a nutshell, the one-minute version, at least as I see Catholic social teaching, subcategory preferential option for the poor. So the question is now, are these things friends or foes? Is libertarianism, which says keep your mitts off of other people and anything else you can do is okay, is it friendly with the preferential option for the poor, or is it opposed to it? And I say it's friendly to it. The two are consistent. Because if you want to cure poverty, the last best way to do it is to have economic freedom. And economic freedom is one of the many freedoms that you have when you are a libertarian, because you can do anything you want except initiate violence against people, and buying and selling and renting and lending money are all legal, because none of them constitute an uninvited border crossing. None of them constitute aggression against other people, innocent people. Father Fred Kammer, who also got in on the thing in the maroon, said that Catholic social teaching is not compatible with libertarianism, and he's quite right. It's not compatible, and I agree it's not compatible, because most of what I understand from Catholic social teaching is they're not libertarians. So my claim is not that it is compatible, my claim is that they should be compatible. Namely, Catholic social teaching should should take cognizance of the fact that the free enterprise system is the last best hope for the poor, and with economic freedom, we can end poverty. And if we're going to look at every public policy from the vantage point of how it impacts the poor, the free enterprise system, laissez-faire capitalism, will help the poor. Let me give you an example. I bought this watch for $20. I value the watch more than $20, so I made a profit off the deal. The guy who sold me the watch valued the watch at less than $20, so he made a profit off the deal. Profit is not a dirty word. We had mutual cooperation, and that's all the market consists of, is voluntary interaction of a commercial type. And here we both gained, at least in the ex-ante sense of anticipations. Later on, in the ex-post sense, possibly one or the other might have regretted it. But the point is that all the market consists of is voluntary interaction, and voluntary interaction necessarily makes both parties better off. Adam Smith wrote a book about it. The book was entitled The Wealth of Nations, and he asked, how do nations get wealthy? And he answered quite correctly, by allowing free trade and free this and free that and a free economy. He wasn't a perfect libertarian. He was pretty good. Give him a B-, maybe a B+, but he was pretty good. I involved myself in an empirical examination of countries, and I examined about 105 different countries, and I rated them, me and my co-authors, we rated them in terms of economic freedom. And then we looked at their per capita wealth and the growth rate, and you'll never guess what we found. Yes, we found a very sharp positive correlation, a statistically significant one. So if you really take the preferential option to the poor to your bosom, if you make it part of your Weltanschauung, if you make it part of your philosophy, and you want to help the poor, what you have to do is embrace free enterprise, because any other economic system does not adhere to the economic freedom of libertarianism. Any other economic system, whether it's fascism or socialism or communism or any other kind of economic system, will impoverish people. So if you really believe in the preferential option for the poor, you are logically compelled to adopt libertarianism. Let me give you a few examples. Take restrictions on entry. Young black girls can do those hair braiding things on black people, and they're pretty good at it, and yet the government refuses to allow them to do it. The government threatens to put them in jail because they didn't go to beautician school or some other school where they don't even learn how to do hair braiding. Another example would be Uber, the taxi thing. People drive around and are comfortable and safe doing that, and what do you think the taxi business thinks about that? Not too well. So the point is that if you want to help the poor, and black girl braiders, corn braiders, or whatever you call it, hair braiders, are poor, and the government is stopping them, and the free market system, the Institute for Justice, which is a free market institution, a libertarian institution, is going to court and trying to get them to allow these girls to do hair braiding. The same thing with Uber. There was a case north of the lake, Pontchartrain, where a bunch of people were trying to build coffins. This was a religious order was trying to build coffins, and guess what the ordinary coffin makers were saying? Oh, no, you can't do that. You got to get a permission and this and that. And the free enterprise system says you can do anything you want as long as you don't initiate violence against innocent people. And making a coffin is not per se an uninvited border crossing into someone else's person and property. Another example is doctors. One of the reasons that our medical system is so messed up is because of restrictions on entry into medical school. If I want to start another medical school and hire doctors to be the professors, guess what will happen to me? I'll go to jail. If a present medical school wants to invite a freshman class of doctors more than the AMA says that they should be allowed to, they'll be struck off and they won't be able to have a hospital or a medical school. That's why medicine costs so much, and this idea of we should have socialized medicine to cure the problem, well, the problem was created by government in the first place. According to the research I did, I calculated the income of doctors compared to PhDs in chemistry and biology, and doctors make almost 10 times as much. I picked PhDs in biology and chemistry on the ground that if you can get a PhD in those fields, you could probably become a doctor if you wanted to. So doctors are making an inordinate amount of money. They're making profits, but this is crony capitalism. This isn't laissez-faire capitalism. Crony capitalism, which is something that the Pope Francis and Bernie Sanders, my old high school track team member, friend of mine, they don't make a distinction between crony capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism. I favor laissez-faire capitalism, economic freedom, not getting rich by having protectionism or having eminent domain like Donald Trump does or anything else like that. Another example is the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a vicious, nasty attack on the poor. People think the minimum wage is sort of like a floor under wages, and the more you raise it, the higher wages go. No, no, no. It's not that. It's an unemployment law. It doesn't say that anyone has to hire anyone. It just says that if you don't pay them 15 or whatever the amount is, 12 or 10, you can't hire them. Well, suppose my productivity is $6 an hour, and in order to get a job, I have to be paid 15. And if I'm paid 15, they're going to lose $9 an hour on me. Either they're not going to hire me in the first place, or they're going to go broke because they're losing $9 an hour on me because I'm worth 6. My productivity is 6, and they have to pay me 15. This is a vicious, depraved, immoral law against the poor. And if you believe in the preferential option for the poor, you can't favor the minimum wage. And yet a lot of Catholic social thought people, what they really need is a course in Economics 101. They should learn. Thank you. I paid them to do that, but next time a little more enthusiasm. No, I'm kidding. This is just plain old ordinary Economics 101, and these people don't understand it, and they somehow favor thinking And these are the good guys. The bad guys are the ones who know full well that the minimum wage will unemploy unskilled workers and want it. And why do they want it? Mainly because they're in unions and they're competing with unskilled workers, and you price out your competition. The unskilled workers are worth $4, $5, $6, $7 an hour, and they're going to take jobs away from the highly skilled workers, and the employer would love to hire 3 or 4 of them and fire one of those guys. The way to get rid of them is, look, that's what they do with Uber. They say the minimum price for Uber from an airport should be $75 or $175. Do you see the linkage? If you can price Uber out of the market, you say, well, we favor Uber. It's just that they should charge $500, let's say. Well, then nobody's going to go to Uber. Well, it's the same thing with the minimum wage law. A vicious, depraved law against the poor, and these people favor it because they don't understand economics or they're vicious. Now, I don't think that my opponent is vicious. I've had dinner with him many times. We're friends. Hopefully we'll have dinner again if he stops punching me in Another example is welfare. Now, you might think welfare is a great idea. You want to help the poor. The problem is with welfare is you have to steal money from people and give it to other people. And we've just said that the key element of libertarianism is you keep your mitts off of other people and their property. Well, if you have taxes for welfare, you're not keeping your mitts off of other people. You're forcing them to pay money to give to these people. So it would be incompatible with libertarianism right from the get-go. Well, does it even help the poor? No, it doesn't help the poor. It hurts the poor because it breaks up the family. And not just the black family, but the white family in Sweden, it's broken up. It's not even broken up. It never forms in the first place. My research showed that before the welfare really got started in 1965 with LBJ's Great Society, the black and the white family were roughly as intact. The white family is a little bit better by a percentage or two. After that, this is Charles Murray, Losing Ground, that I'm channeling now. After that, what happened is that the welfare system was so generous that it made an offer to the young girl who was pregnant much better financially than the amount of money that could be earned by the father of her child. And before that, it was a disgrace to have a child out of wedlock. If you had a child without wedlock, you had to go to Aunt Mary and give up the baby because it was just a disgrace. Nowadays, they have whole high school classes for pregnant girls that are unmarried. You think this is helping them? No. The key amount of, look, poverty is almost totally, shut up. I'm going to fail. He's in my class, so I can fail him if he cuts me off. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, poverty. If one last point, markets and used body parts. We have problems, and this is really poor people that have to be on, dialysis machines, and they're not allowed to buy and sell used body parts. And if they were allowed to buy and sell used body parts, we'd be up to our armpits in used body parts, pardon the expression, and there'd be nobody, we wouldn't have a gigantic shortage because right now the effective price is price zero. We have price controls, namely you're not allowed to buy and sell. And that's horrible because you're allowed to give a kidney to someone else. You're allowed to give things to people. But if you charge for it, it's no good. Where did we get that from? I mean, take prostitution. If you go to bed with somebody, that's legal, or at least it should be legal. But somehow if there's a price for it, then it's no good. Okay, I'm out of my 15 minutes. I've pretty much covered, well, I got plenty more on that. But now let me, I'm sorry? Yeah, now I get 10 minutes, and then Ed gets the 10 minutes to comment on me. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave off my opening statement about how great free enterprise is, and it'll cure poverty, cure what ails you. And now I'll talk about a comment on what my friend Ed said. Started off with Charles Koch, and Charles Koch mentioned virtue. There's nothing wrong with a libertarian mentioning virtue. Not every statement from every libertarian, and he is a libertarian, has to be a libertarian statement. I like chess. I like Mozart. I'm a libertarian. I'm allowed to say that. I can't say it qua libertarian, but I can certainly say it. So if you quote Charles Koch talking about something, he's not confined to always he's he's not confined to speaking only about libertarianism. He can speak about whatever he wants, and I think Ed quoted him properly, accurately, but I don't think that this somehow undermines libertarianism, that he speaks about non-libertarian things like virtue. Virtue is a non-libertarian thing because libertarianism is concerned only with what the law should be, not with virtue. Not everything has to be concerned with everything. The next thing he said is that we're only concerned about the well-being of individuals, not society. Well, that's true, but who else makes up society other than individuals? And the problem with looking at the well-being of society is that the well-being of society, people conflict, and there's no way to compare interpersonal utility. You can't say, well, we made this guy better off and that guy worse off, and therefore society as a whole is better. No. You can't make any such deduction. If one person, suppose we all jump on Gage and take all his money, and we're all better off and he's worse off. Is society better off? It's impossible to say, because we're better off and he's worse off, and you can't compare incommensurables. All property in common, from each according to his ability, from each according to his need, that's compatible with libertarianism if it's done voluntarily. There's nothing wrong with the Marxist notion of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We have a family right here. There's Larry Bean, Grace, and Leo. And Leo, who's 10 years old, does not eat in accordance with his ability to earn income. He eats or has toys in accordance with his needs. And that's a family, and there's nothing wrong with that. So to say that somehow libertarians are against that, as long as it's voluntary, there's no problem with it. Now Ed talks about there's only one kind of libertarianism, actually there are many kinds of libertarianism. I see 4 types of libertarianism. The best libertarianism, the one that I happen to adhere to, by coincidence, is anarcho-capitalism. Namely, government is per se evil because government violates the libertarian law against non-aggression. It taxes people who didn't agree to pay. The U.S. government is not a social club. We didn't all agree to be part of it and agree to pay taxes. So that would be the highest virtuous, best version of libertarianism, and the name associated with that is Murray Rothbard. The second highest would be minimal government libertarianism, sometimes called minarchism. This is associated with Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick. And here, the government is very, very limited only to protecting person and property. And to that end, you need armies, courts, and police. Armies to keep bad guys off of us, not to go exporting democracy. Police to keep local bad guys off us, not to have victimless crimes. And courts to determine who the good guys and the bad guys are. The third level, associated with Ron Paul, is constitutionalism. The U.S. Constitution is pretty good. Not excellent, but pretty good. Give it a B+. So that would be the third level. And the fourth lowest level, where these people are hardly libertarians, but I'm a Big Tent kind of guy, would be classical liberalism. The most famous names there are Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. They are favoring free enterprise, but they make so many concessions and so many exceptions that they're only quasi-libertarians. So there are 4 different views of libertarianism, and only anarcho-capitalism adheres fully, logically, with regard to the non-aggression principle. Now, we all own ourselves. God owns us. Libertarian, look, I happen to be an atheist, but I'm a pro-religious atheist because I adhere to the view that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And who is my biggest enemy? Government. And how does government treat religion, especially the commie governments? Not too well. And therefore, I see there's a competition for the hearts and minds of the people. And on the one hand, we have government, and on the other hand, we have the church and the family. And I favor the church and the family, even though I am not myself religious, but I favor religion. And religion does not violate rights. If you believe in God, that is not per se a violation of the libertarian axiom or libertarian principle of non-aggression. And yet, because of the nefarious influence of Ayn Rand, who was a virulent atheist, a lot of libertarians are against religion, which I think is totally unjustified. Okay, who can own who? So libertarianism is a theory not of God and man, but of just man, intra-human relations. So we forget about God for the moment. I'm sure he won't mind. We focus on other things. And we only have several choices. One choice is we each own ourselves, which means anyone messing with me, like he did over here, is a bad guy, and I'm going to sue him for that. It was very nasty. That's one view. We each own ourselves. We're each sovereign. No one may properly punch us unless we agree to it, like getting into a boxing match or a voluntary sadomasochist relationship. So that's one option. Not that I favor sadomasochism, but I'm not putting them in jail because they did not violate the libertarian non-aggression principle. The second one is no one owns anyone. Well, if no one owns anyone, I don't have a right to scratch my ear, because how dare I use this body that I don't own? So we have to reject that because we'd all die. The third one is we each own 1/7 billionth of everyone. That's the only other logic. Oh, well, there's one more. But if we each own 1/7 billionth of everyone, that's another recipe for disaster, because nobody could do anything. You can't even call a committee meeting to decide if I can scratch my ear. The fourth one is the Joneses own everyone else, or the Nazis own everyone, the Aryans, or whoever it is. And then the problem with that is, what makes them so special? So libertarians reject the Joneses or the Nazis own everyone. They reject no one owns anyone. We reject we all own 1/7 billionth of us. And what's the only other possibility? We each own ourselves. We're all sovereign. We're all inviolate, which I think is the proper way, that no one should compel us to do anything. We should all be free. What's wrong with freedom? The next one is dignity. Well, how do you get dignity? One way to get dignity, I think the only way to get dignity, is to not be molested. Because if you're molested, you don't have dignity. Now, there's nothing wrong with treating people like an object. There's nothing wrong with treating people like a means to your ends. For example, I bought this pen. Probably stole it from someone else, but that's a whole other issue. But I bought this pen. I treated the guy as an object. I didn't ask, how is your family, or, try to be friends with him. I just said, $1, okay, here's $1. And he treated me as an object. Nothing wrong with treating people as an object, as long as you do it in a voluntary basis. What else do we have? There's no such thing as a church or a community for libertarianism? I mean, where do you get that from? Yes, libertarians are individuals, and we can voluntarily coalesce in a group. I'm a member of the chess club. Some people are a member of a church. Other people are members of the tennis club. You can have all sorts of voluntary organizations by consent. Just because we favor individual rights doesn't mean we're against groups. I mean, I think he's got to do a little more homework in finding out what libertarianism is. Libertarianism does not oppose people voluntarily getting together in groups. Oh yeah, now the last thing he said was this person gets run over by a car. Now, a person gets run over by a car, the human part of us is going to say, whoa, let's call an ambulance, or let's try to help this person. That's the reasonable, nice way for people to act. But libertarians are not good Samaritans. Remember, what libertarianism is concerned about is not niceness. It's rather, what should the law be? Now, somebody gets hit with a bicycle. Did I hit the person with a bicycle, and the person on the bicycle is now lying bleeding on the floor in need of help? I didn't hit him. So if I'm not a good Samaritan, should I go to jail? And the answer from the libertarian is no. And if you take the opposite point of view, you're a hypocrite. Because I notice you all have two eyes. You dirty rats, you. Two eyes. Do you realize that there are people with no eyes? That there are people that if you gave them one of your eye, they would go from blindness to one eye, and you would go from two eyes to one eye. Now, one eye isn't so bad. It's true you can't be a target shooter, and you can't be a basketball player because you lose your depth perception. You can't be a race car driver if you only have one eye. But it's not so bad to have one eye. And yet, my friend Ed has two eyes. If he was serious about this, he would be giving up one of them, and he's got two kidneys, and he would be giving up one of those. And he's got a nice, and he's got a nice suit and tie. Be giving that up because there are very poor people. Now, it's true that a lot of the poor people don't live around here, and they're not as immediate to us as the person on the bicycle lying on the floor bleeding. But still, the principle is the same. If you believe that you have a legal obligation to help the poor, you're in trouble. Because there are people in Africa and Asia and everywhere else that are in dire straits and you're not doing anything about it. And any theory that makes all of us hypocrites is got something wrong with that theory. Whereas the libertarian view is the way to help those people in the third world is to get rid of tariffs and to get rid of foreign aid, of course, and to have free enterprise, and that way they'll be uplifted. Thanks for your attention.
He did say the words, "The Nazis own everyone," so I hope someone is calling the New York Times by now. I made the mistake and stopped paying attention. I didn't give him a 1-minute warning, so I gave him 11 minutes, so I'm going to give you 11 minutes also, Father Bosik.
Thank you. And thank you, Walter. Vibrant exchange, I hope you see. And I hope you can see that there's differences between us. But I'll now diminish some of the differences only to exploit them. Okay? So that's my first thing. First thing off is that Walter, good colleague that he is refines his work, as he well said, in terms of a theory of just law. Okay? Now, with that, it should have been clear to me that he's not concerned about ethics. Many of the appeals, however, that he makes are, well, that would be a terrible world. But he says, I don't care about that. I'm only concerned about what just laws are. So we've got a kind of a discrepancy in terms of his arguments are highly moral oftentimes, but in terms of his basic thesis, he's saying, I'm not interested in ethics. For example, in one of his books, he says libel or extortion. Are they legitimate? He says they're despicable, but they should be legal. Prostitution, despicable, but should be legal. Slavery, he doesn't say, but some of his colleagues would say slavery. As long as you voluntarily put yourself into slavery, it's perfectly fine. Because we're not talking about ethics, we're only talking about what the law would permit. So if you narrow the world really, really narrowly, then you get into a position in which, okay, we're not talking the kinds of concerns that Catholics typically have. Catholics are less interested in the law, although we are interested in the law. Now, we all end up into, and as Walter has said, I can be a hypocrite. The fact that I have two eyes, okay, there is a certain sense of that. What Christians tend to say, but I'm not sure they're consistent, but Christians tend to say, you have to be minimally decent, and you have to have a minimally decent world, and after that, then there can be these kinds of disadvantages. Now, we're all tends to be hypocrites, if I may, at least it occurred to me, and Walter may disagree with this. Walter is in favor of libel. It's okay. I mean, not morally in favor, but legally in favor. Nevertheless, he's suing the New York Times for libel. So the point being is, well, we're all inconsistent, if I may put it that way. But the point being is there we are. So that's the first thing to say is that, okay, we're talking not legal, we're not talking ethics. We're also not talking economics. Although he is an economic teacher, he's now doing political philosophy. He's not talking about intellectual economics because he proposes that intellectual property has no right to exist. Now, he admits that that might be bad for the economy, but that's not his concern. His concern is that there shouldn't be laws in favor of intellectual property. He is certainly in favor of, and I could appreciate this, for hiring an incompetent cousin for your enterprise. The enterprise might, over the course of 50 years, go downhill, might disappear, but under the principles that Walter has, it's legally perfectly fine. So he's not worried about maximization of profit. He's not worried about making a good economic system. He's rather simply trying to suggest that, hey, this is the way the law should be. Now, the basis of the law is not so very clear. The same thing can be said in terms of drugs. He admits that drugs are bad sorts of things. There should be no laws against them, illicit drugs. They shouldn't be illicit. And he admits that this might ruin the economy, but that's not his concern. His concern is only that there not be a law against taking drugs, even if it ruins the economy, even if it ruins people's lives. There just shouldn't be a law against this. So what Walter says is very clear. It's a narrow, narrow view. I'm not concerned about how society goes. I'm not concerned about how the economy goes. I'm not concerned about those sorts of things. All I'm concerned about is this one principle that you shouldn't interfere with people. The same thing can be said in terms of the basic, well, it can be in terms of political philosophy or the basis for it. What would be the foundation of even the rule that he has? Namely, you can't interfere with other people. Notice it's a two-part, although actually I only heard one part today, so maybe I'm mistaken here. Usual libertarianism says you have a right to your own self and you have a right to property, although those are distinguished among some libertarians. The question is whether you really do, should there be a law, a libertarian law against invading other people's property? And that has to do with a whole theology or whole understanding of what the nature of property is, and I'm not sure that that's very well developed. Now, I appreciate, and here's an empirical question I can't answer. I can appreciate that if you think that we should be taking care of the poor, if that's the case, then it might be that libertarianism is the best way to do that. That's an economic question. I really am not qualified. I suspect it's not. Okay, let me be clear. But I haven't had Economics 101, so I'm not so sure that this won't work. But notice that if you're interested in helping the poor, then this might be a way to go. The ethical question should be, you should be interested in the poor, and Walter says, I'm not concerned about that. But if you happen to take these Catholic principles, you want to help people, fine. If you want to help the rich, well, then my principle might help them too. And if you wanted to make people, if it is the case that slavery would work better for helping people get out of poverty, then, and again, this is the kind of situation I'm talking about. Let's put it in simple kind of graphic terms. Gage, you're starving. I'll give you 50 cents a day to work. If I give you 50 cents a day to work, you'll live an extra maybe 2-3 days than you would because you're now starving. So that's perfectly fine. It's a free contract. We engage in it. What the minimum wage kind of business is trying to say is that people have a right to live well. I shouldn't say well. Let me say minimally well. And if an economic system ought to provide that. Or an ethical system ought to provide that. And Walter Block, I think, says, if you want to do that, maybe I got the solution for you. I'm not going to argue too much on one way or the other on that. Now, in terms of family, the same sort of thing. It has to do with the laws. A question that I put to Walter once upon a time at one of our dinner meetings. They're really engaged. I ruined my meal, and he comes out saying, hey, it was a great meal. So I said to him, supposing your child is in the backyard and it's starving, should you have any obligation to feed your own child? Answer, no. Legally speaking, no. Okay, should anybody have an obligation to pick up that child? No. Should society have an obligation? No, there is no such thing as a society. So nobody should take care of the starving child in your backyard. It is perfectly fine and proper, appropriate to do so, but you don't have any obligation to do so because the law says don't hurt people. It doesn't say do help people. So I can understand this is a legal framework. It's a kind of legal framework you can work with, but it's very counterintuitive to me as the proper legal framework. In the Catholic tradition, there is what we call at least 5 or 6 different kinds of senses of justice. One of which Walter fully supports, and this is very Catholic. You're very Catholic here, Walter, so I'm just going to baptize you now. And that is this contractual justice, okay? Yes, okay. Well, contractual justice, okay, free people engaging with one another. That's perfectly fine. But there are 2 other kinds of justices that are there, and one of them is called distributive justice, and the other is called contributive justice. Now, big fancy words for saying that we belong with one another and we owe it to one another to help one another. And if we're not helping one another, we're not doing our part. So what Walter describes as stealing, namely the government taking your money from you, the Catholic tradition turns around and says, oh no, this is your chance and an obligation, and even legal obligation to contribute to society. You have an obligation to contribute, and if you're not contributing, then you're failing in your social responsibilities. Another part of this same kind of ethic says distributive. If we exist as a group, then not quite apart from the fact of whether we agree to it or not, if we're belonging to a group, we have obligations to help one another. So we have an obligation to take the goods that we have and distribute them. Now, underneath all of this is a sense of communal property, if you will. It's not exactly the same thing it's not antithetical to private property, because that's also in place. But in the kind of framework that is typical in libertarianism is that whoever gets there first is the sort of person who owns it. Now, if I were to be extreme, and I'm just talking about extremes. If I got into this room first and breathed the air, then you all have to pay me for the rest of the air, because I got here first and I used the air, and by virtue of ownership, no one holds this, but the point is if I get to the property first and make a claim on that particular forest, then I do own the forest, is the claim that comes out of Locke. The same sort of thing could be applied to the oceans and so forth. The oceans belong to, well, the first person who fished in them. And again, no one makes that particular claim, although it's part underneath all of this. The reverse side, which is in extreme form, is the oceans belong to all of us, the land belongs to all of us. And then for very practical reasons, the Catholic tradition has been very much in favor of private property. But it starts with the framework of this is God's gift to us all, and now let's figure out a good system by which people live well, and private property is one of the ways that we do that. Thank you.
The format of the debate, Father Bostic, you should come back up. The format of the debate that we agreed upon before was that you would begin in the closing remarks, and Dr. Block would conclude.
Okay.
So now this is going to be 5 minutes.
Okay. Not much to say.
And then how much time do I get?
Okay. Closing remarks. There are there's lots of things to say, so many things to say. Essential difference here has to do with our relationship to societies. Do we belong to societies? Essential way of saying that in the Catholic tradition goes in two very different directions. First direction, solidarity, big word that came out of with Pope John Paul II, but has always been consistent. And that is that we have a kind of common life, and that we should share that common life. That's the first basic idea, so that when we're talking about the people in Africa who are starving, I'm worried, okay? And am I a hypocrite? Yeah, okay? We have a certain kind of minimal decency. I have, unfortunately, and unfortunately, lots of people want to give me something, and they give me Starbucks cards, okay? Now, I don't pay for them, but if you see me in Starbucks, you'll be seeing me paying $5 for a cup of coffee, and that's just okay. When there are people starving and I'm drinking a $5 cup of coffee, I always feel a little guilty. I've got the card it's given to me, but there's a certain kind of hypocriticalness in life. Living in the United States has a certain kind of an effect there. So I should be, and I do feel, well, Walter thinks that I shouldn't, but I do feel somewhat guilty about the fact that I live so well, and people are, somewhere around 20,000 people every day are starving to death, and I go to Starbucks. So I do feel somewhat guilty. I'm willing to feel guilty about that. I'd like to change it, but I probably don't have the courage to do so. Walter just absolves me of guilt, and so he's being my confessor. He says, you don't need to be worried about that at all. Thank you, Walter, for doing that. The second thing is solidarity is not only there, but there's subsidiarity. And this comes closer to what Walter has to say. Subsidiarity is that, hey, if you can do it, then the larger group shouldn't do it. And to the degree that individuals can run their own lives without interference with government, without the help of government, the Roman Catholic Church is strongly, strongly in favor of that. But there are a lot of things that individuals can't do. And so, okay, we need to form voluntary associations, partly. But we also need to do voluntary associations such as the United States, but also we have other kinds of associations that we group together, and corporations are some of those. The point being is that the smallest unit should be able to do whatever it can do on its own, but it can't do everything. So can an individual, to take one of Walter's examples, can an individual decide, I come to Gage and I say, Gage, you say you can help me. I'm in need of medical care. And Gage says, hey, this is a good mark. So I'm going to say, yeah, I can help you, and I'll give you these pills, and then I'm going to go off and get on my circuit rider, and, I will die. But, hey, who's to say? Who's to criticize Gage for pretending to be a doctor? Walter, since I can't make that judgment, we have a society that says we ought to authorize doctors. Some people know what they're doing, and some people don't know what they're doing. And so as a consequence, we should have certification for doctors. Under Walter's proposal, if Gage cheats me and I die, so be it. If there's enough people that come to, if enough people know that Gage is not going to be a good doctor, hey, then fine, they will stop going to him as a doctor. But remember, the hypothesis I have here is Gage has gone off to Texas to help people, and then he's gone off to Arkansas to help people, and in each time he fails, but there should be no regulation on his failure. That's the understanding is it takes a larger group to understand whether or not a person is competent or not. So that, in short, is the kind of, I've got one more minute, so let me just say, in addition to all of that I had to say, and this is where Walter is not talking about ethics, and I grant that, so I'm going to not address him directly, but the Christian message is not only that of justice, but it's also that of love. And of course, as Walter would be the first to admit, he has no place for that. Not that he isn't a loving person, but that it doesn't fit in his system, because he's just talking about what kind of laws we ought to have. And he might say there can't be no law to love. In the legal framework, government framework, yes. In a larger framework, of course, that's the basic law.
This will be the last speech of the debate before we open questions.
Ed says, I don't care about the poor. I do care about the poor, and one way to help the poor is to have economic freedom. If you don't have economic freedom, you're not really caring about the poor all that much. He made a slight mistake. I don't favor the legalization of extortion. Rather, I favor the legalization of blackmail. And I don't have time to go into the difference between extortion and blackmail, but it's in one of my books that Ed's got over there, Defending the Undefendable One, the one behind there. And I also explain why libel, I suppose I could talk about libel. You don't own your reputation, so if I said Ed takes baths with rubber duckies, and people now abjure him, I've libeled him, and I've ruined his reputation, but paradoxically, he doesn't own his reputation, because his reputation consists of what we think of him, not what he thinks of himself. And it's true that he works hard to uphold his reputation, and he will lose out by having a bad reputation, but still, I have not violated his rights because he doesn't own his reputation. And paradoxically, reputations would be safer, not more at risk, if we had free libel, because then people would libel each other till the cows come home, and no longer would mere allegations suffice to ruin reputations. He says that an incompetent cousin, sure, you can hire, what do you call it when you hire an incompetent cousin? Nepotism. Yes, nepotism is allowed, but that won't ruin the economy. What you're saying is that you value your cousin more than the profit, and if it's your company, you have a right to do with it as you wish, and if you go broke, it's your business. But you're not ruining the economy. You're enhancing the economy because you value your cousin's working more than a couple of bucks. He says that I want to legalize drugs even though it'll ruin the economy. My goodness, I mean, we have so many murders in this city. Every weekend, 2 or 3 people, young black men, are shooting each other. That's not helping the economy. When we prohibited alcohol, we had young Italian men shooting each other. If you want to legalize these things, you're not ruining the economy, you're enhancing the economy. He says that he forgets about voluntary charity. The best way to help the poor is first to have free enterprise, in which case they'll be richer. And the second way is for those people who can't benefit from free enterprise, and there are some people like that, you have private charity. That's a much better way of doing it than having government with its gun forcing people to do things. He says somehow slavery would work better to help people. I must have missed something. I mean, slavery is one of the most heinous affairs possible, and how that can help anyone except the enslaver certainly is not going to help the poor. With regard to the minimum wage and the right to live well, there is no right to live well. There's only a right not to be molested. Now, we would like everyone to live well, and the best way to get everyone to live well is to increase people's productivity, and the only way you can really get people's productivity increased is to allow them to have a job and they get on-the-job training. But if you have a minimum wage law, you cut them off from that, so they're not going to live that well. Look, if the minimum wage was so good, why be so cheapskatey about it and raise it to 15? Why not raise it to $3,000 an hour, and then we'll all be rich? I mean, this is the logic of the minimum wage, and it's preposterous. Yes, it would be nice if we could all live well, but you can't do it with a legislative pen. And if you try to do it, what you do is you make people live not well because they're unemployed. And when they're unemployed, they get bored. And when they get bored, they get into crime. And then the jails are filled up to the brim with young black men who are in jail because of the minimum wage law, because they're forced into idleness, and because of these drug laws. So how are you helping the poor in that way? With regard to children starving, you do have an obligation to do it, and I've written about this. I'm on record. If you want to Google me on that, I've written 4 or 5 articles, and I don't have time to explain that, but you most certainly would not be allowed to starve your child in your house. You would be obliged to bring them to an orphanage or to the hospital or to the church, so I think that that's wrong. Yes, there's distributive justice, and the distributive justice for the libertarian is whatever you earn, you keep. That's distributive justice. And you don't take stuff from other people because that's called stealing. My most recent book is on owning the ocean. You don't get to own the whole ocean or the Mississippi River. I claim we should own the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River should be owned by about 100,000 people that used it based on the Lockean homesteading theory. But you don't get to own the whole thing just because you take a swim in the river. The common heritage, the oceans are the common heritage of all mankind. You unleash the tragedy of the commons. And
Whenever my GPA tanks this semester, let it be known that it's because he's going to fail me. So now we're going to open up the question and answer period, and how this is going to work is, all of you are going to have a minute to ask, whatever question you want, and then both of them are going to answer the question. They're both going to have 2 minutes to answer, starting with Father Vosik and then ending with Dr. Block. And I'm going to use my privileges as moderator that I just now made up that I have, and ask the first question. So it occurred to me that throughout the debate that, there were different tenets of Catholic social teaching mentioned. There was the preferential option for the poor. There's the principle of subsidiarity, which more or less affirms individualism. And then there's the theory of justice, which Father Vosik, you agreed Block would be consistent with. So my question is, maybe Catholic social teaching is just so confused that we can't really answer the question of the debate tonight, that if libertarianism is friends or foe of Catholic social thought, and I was wondering what your thought about that might be.
I could let Walter answer that. No, let me start. It could be that it's confused, all right? I'm going to use a different word. It's called complex. When you got complexity, you have to take into account many things, and therefore you don't get simple, clear answers. That's why Catholic ethics, social ethics, tends to be just moderate principles that are involved. When I'm working with my students, I say, what do you have to take into account when you make a moral decision? In principle, everything. Past, present, future, and all the possible people of the world. No one can make a decision like that. One of the faults of utilitarianism is you're supposed to know everything before you can make a decision. Nobody can do that. Okay, having said that, then question is well, what are the sorts of relevant factors? And I'm suggesting there are more relevant factors than just the one factor that has been listed by Dr. Block. His view is much more simple. I think it leads to all sorts of bad consequences, but chiefly bad consequences in understanding what human life is like. So it's not simply the economic kind of a matter. It's not simply the legal matter, but it also helps us to understand what it is like to be a human being. So being a human being is much broader. It includes a lot of things that Dr. Block and I would agree on, and there was love and charity and all of that kind of stuff. It's just that all of those things get left out of his system. And the Catholic tradition says, well, it's a little love and a little justice, and it's a little this, and it's a little that, and it's a little that, and keep it all in mind, and now collectively we have to make a decision. So you won't get the same kind of clarity, and for that very reason, at one point the Catholic Church was against capitalism. The Catholic Church is not against capitalism, is not against socialism. It says there's just a kind of, here's some principles we have to pay attention to.
Libertarians favor love. We're the best lovers. Loving people is not against the law. Playing chess is not against the law. So we favor anything that is legal. The only things we disfavor are rape, murder, and theft, and things like that. With regard to this, I don't think Catholic social thought is confusing. I think it's a many-splendored thing, as I said. But I was focusing on only one element of it, namely the preferential option for the poor, which is certainly one element of it. And I was saying if you adhere to that and you focus just on that, and I like to focus on one thing at a time, and if you focus on that, how do we get out of poverty? How do we enrich people? How do we have a preferential option for the poor? And the answer of all of history and all of economic logic is have economic freedom. So I don't see the problem. I just wanted to mention this thing since I have another 30 seconds. Libertarians don't favor licensing for doctors, but we most certainly do favor certification. What you would have instead of a licensing bureau, which means that if you don't pass, you can't practice, you would have an industry of certification. Not a Food and Drug Administration, where if they make a mistake, they stay in business, but an industry of 10 or 15, like Standard & Poor and Moody's and Fitch, which rate bonds and stocks. You would have an industry which rated doctors, and before you pick the doctor, you'd go and see what the certifications are. So libertarians favor that, and I think Ed misspoke on that.
So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand and I'll ask you to stand up and speak loudly for the camera.
It doesn't have to be a question. It could also be
or
a comment
that you would like to respond
but
to.
limited to a minute.
All right, Ben, you stood up first.
What's the difference between the libertarian view on gay marriage and the Jesuit view?
Father Vosick.
You don't want me to get to that one, do you? All right.
Well, he went first last time, so I have to go
Yeah,
first.
you
this
go
time?
first.
Okay.
Well, that's not the format that we agreed on. So,
No, it is.
Father Vosick.
No, we agreed that we would alternate. He
Okay,
went
well-
first last time, so I go first this time.
All right,
So
well-
we share the last and the first. I think
All right,
that's
go
what
ahead.
we agreed on.
You're right, I'm wrong.
From the libertarian point of view, there should be a separation of church and state. There should be a separation of education and state. There should be a separation of marriage and state. There should be a separation of everything in state because the state is illegitimate. So we shouldn't have the state. We should have individuals voluntarily contracting with each other. And if a heterosexual couple wants to get married, that's a contract that they would have with each other, and that's fine. And if a gay or lesbian couple wanted to get together, or even, polygamy. If 3 men and 4 women wanted to get married, or 1 man and 5 women, or 6 women and 4 men, or whatever wanted to get married, that's their business. Anything between consenting adults, and marrying someone is not per se a violation of rights. So anyone can marry anyone that they want. That would be what I take to be the libertarian view. And if the government is in charge, the government should not be able to discriminate. Individuals should be able to discriminate to their heart's content, but the government should not be able to discriminate. And the reason we want to have separation of government and everything else is contrary to what Ed said. He said that the U.S. government is a voluntary association. I don't remember joining it.
Father Bosick?
Well, back to gay marriage, I'd like to avoid. All right. First, Walter and I disagree, of course, on you can do whatever you want as long as you agree to it. But in other words, we would distinguish between a right and doing what is right. So, big, important kind of a distinction. You have my English professor used to say, you have a perfect right to be wrong. In other words, if I say 2 times 3 is equal to 39, I have every right to say that. It's just not 39, but I can have every right to say that. So when Dr. Block and company talk about the rights, they're talking about the first kind of right. I have a right to be wrong. Okay, that's fine. But there's still such a thing as right and wrong. This is a different meaning of the word right and wrong. So 2 times 3 is not equal to 39. 2 times 3 is equal to 6. And so there's a right answer, but I can have a perfect right to be wrong. That's the first thing. Okay. Second sort of a thing has to do with the kind of exclusion, namely it's their business. Now, again, we disagree because I have a social kind of an understanding in which what one person does affect other people. And Walter is pretty insistent that that should not be part of the legal system that we're here. And I might even agree with him there. So, but the fact is that how we live does affect other people. And as long as Walter would say, as long as we don't physically affect them, then that's fine. But if we affect them otherwise, as long as we don't physically affect them, that's fine. So there's no sense of building a society because, as Walter says, there is no society other than the free agreement. Okay, so that's the second part. Third part has to do with same-sex marriage. That's where Benjamin. Oh,
That's when we have to end
wonderful! I talked out.
Maybe we should have buzzers in the audience. The candidates don't answer the question, we buzz them. But Mr. Bina, you're next.
Father Basic, wouldn't you concede that the Roman Catholic Church has adopted some degree of the non-aggression principles and libertarianism, like insofar as I'm a Lutheran Christian?
Mm-hmm.
So I deny the primacy of the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when you Jesuits would have burned me at the stake for that.
Yeah.
But now we have the sense that that would violate the non-aggression principle. The Roman Catholic Church would say I'm unethical for believing this, but you will tolerate my unethicalness by allowing me to go about and live free, and we would cooperate and be friends and go to dinner and all of that. I think you were kind of questioning libertarianism's dichotomy between that which is ethical and that which is legal. But we don't, for instance, it's unethical to have a shrine to Satan, but I don't think you and I would say, let's go prosecute people, put them in jail, or execute them if they want to have a shrine to Satan. So I think that maybe you are overreaching a little bit in saying that ethics and the law need to overlap. Sometimes we do separate them.
Excuse me, sometimes we do separate them, and the Catholic tradition has been very clear that legality and morality can be different. I mean, the classic example is always a bit of a surprise. Thomas Aquinas was in favor of legalized prostitution. He was in favor of legalized prostitution because he figured that's the only way to have some kind of control over this, but it's still wrong, but there's no way to stamp it out. So that, yeah, that's a certain kind of a libertarianism. All I'm suggesting in the first place is Walter makes the separation between legality and morality, and he does so pretty consistently. So that's fine, and sometimes we should criminalize some sorts of things. I would think, for example, libel would be an example of that. Walter says he doesn't approve of slavery, but I don't understand why you can't voluntarily sell yourself as long as it's a free contractual sort of a thing, and say, I now am your property, especially when you think of slavery as ownership, and I can hereby sell my freedom for the rest of my life. I don't know why you can't do that under his system. There's certain sides of myself that said the law ought to prevent that. It should not be allowed, and certainly on a moral basis, I would say the law ought to, the morality of that is wrong.
I favor voluntary slavery. No, I don't favor voluntary slavery. I favor the legalization of voluntary slavery. And the example I use is my son has a dread disease, and Larry over here has long wanted me to be his slave. And I don't have the $5 million that it would take to save my son's life, and I value my son's life more than my freedom. So I make the following deal. I say, Ed, you're a doctor. I'll give you the $5 million, although if you were decent, you would do it for free, but you're a capitalist pig and you want $5 million. So I go to Larry and I say, Larry, give me $5 million. I'll give it to my son's doctor, and my son's life will be saved, and now I'll come be your slave. Well, I favor the legalization of that. It's true the New York Times would not understand that. They would think I favor actual slavery, which was coercive, which was quite a bit different. With regard to libel in the New York Times, I favor the legalization of libel, and yet I'm suing the New York Times on libel, and Ed quite reasonably thinks that I'm being hypocritical. I have an essay, an article written about this. It's based on libertarian ruling class theory, which I have no time to go into now, but if anyone is interested, email me, and I'll send you this justification of suing the New York Times. Ed has no such justification, I don't think, for his hypocrisy, and I think once he admits that he's being hypocritical, it's almost like a knockout blow in boxing. If you admit that you're being hypocritical, you admit that you're acting incompatibly with your theory. Well, then you have to give up your theory if you're an academic or an intellectual, because an academic or an intellectual wants to act in accordance with this theory. I am acting in accordance with my theory. The libel for the New York Times, I justify in ways that I say. And I don't murder, I don't rape, I don't steal, I don't threaten. Therefore, I'm compatible with libertarianism. He has a theory where the fact that he's got 2 eyes and 2 kidneys is incompatible. So I'm saying that his theory is intellectually untenable.
Another question? Yes, in the back.
Yes, this question is regards into.
Speak a little louder.
This question is in regards to prostitution. You say it's by consent, if 2 adult consents, it'll be okay. But now, I'm saying it's not okay now. In Amsterdam, there are women being kidnapped. And again, I know that's being against libertarianism, but it's going to happen. They're going to kidnap these women, and they're going to. I'm just curious of what you have to say about these. And they're going to say, "Oh, I'm consenting to this," but even though they have a videotape of their like. Sorry, I'm getting a little thoughts.
No, you're doing fine. Go, keep going.
In Amsterdam, women are being kidnapped. They are being raped, and they have video cameras, and they film this, and they say and then they're forced into prostitution in Amsterdam, legal prostitution. And then they say, if you tell anyone, I will show this to your mother, this videotape. And this is a rare case, but it's apparent, it's happening. I'm just curious of how you would go about that.
Well, what I would do is put in jail all the people that are guilty of kidnapping.
But how would you know they're guilty? Because that woman is saying, I'm consenting to this because she doesn't want to be embarrassed to her family. It's a rare case, but it's possible. I'm just curious of what you think.
Well, you see, what I do is I adopt a God's eye view, pardon the expression. Namely, I want to find out what is justice. Now, you're asking a very different question. You're asking a policing question. How do you find out the truth? I happen to be Jewish, and I spent a little time with the Talmud, which is the Jewish law. And the Talmud has 2 different things. One is to try to find this out. That's where you get that Solomon case, where there are 2 women arguing as to who the mother of the baby is, and Solomon says, cut the baby in half. And one of them says, okay, and the other one says, no, you let the other woman take the baby. This is an attempt to find out guilt. I'm not so concerned about how to find out guilt. I'm more concerned with assuming we know what's going on, what should the law be? The law should be to take those people that are kidnapping women and deal with them very, very severely. Look, in Nevada, apart from Las Vegas, prostitution is legal, and I've never heard of any stories of that, although possibly it's there. But look, you have kidnappers doing all sorts of things. I mean, there are vicious people out there, and part of the reason for doing this is because prostitution is illegal in many cases, in many areas. It's a very similar thing with regard to markets and used body parts. People say, don't have a market in used body parts because then people will grab other people's body parts against their will. And if I had a blackboard here, I showed it to my intro class, the paradox here is that if we legalize it, it's less likely to happen because right now the price of body parts when it's illegal is very high. So if there's any attempt to kidnap, people will kidnap now. Well, prostitution is illegal in many places, so therefore the price of prostitution is higher. So there's more incentive to kidnap women. So if we legalize prostitution everywhere, there'd be less of that occurring. So with regard to any specific kidnapper, it might be very difficult to bring them to justice. We should really get them. But what we should do is legalize prostitution, and then we'll have less of that. Not zero, because people are, imperfect, but we'll have less of it, and that's what we want.
Father Vosik?
Many things, a couple of things at least. First, the coercion violates the rule that Professor Block has put forward. So we're all agreed on that. Now the consent question is one that is it truly free or not? One of the assumptions, I want to do this in two parts. One of the assumptions of libertarianism, as I understand it, is that except for children, we're all perfectly free, or
Should be perfectly
it
free.
should be perfectly free, which is just a misreading of life. Okay. There are the scientists among us who say that we don't have any freedom whatsoever. We're all compelled by our genes and so forth. I don't agree with that either. But the fact, the kind of a hypothesis that we're free and all the decisions we make are free is simply really very far from what I think is the case. A second part of the same thing, and it has to do with what Walter was suggesting about me. One of the outs for those of us who have Lutheran some sorts of background is there is such a thing called sin, and it comes in the form of I can preach what is true and still be a failure in practicing it. That's not a good sort of a place to be, but it doesn't take away from the truth of what I have to say just because I don't practice it. There's a second part of this element of sin, and that is that if you have the kind of world that Walter argues for, it presupposes everybody's going to be rational and conscious and so forth. And one of the things that economists are finally, at least I'm told, finally coming to realize is people aren't rational actors in that same kind of, logical sort of a way. People have many different concerns. As Walter himself said, I hire my cousin who's incompetent. I have every right to do that. It's not a very good economic decision, but it's a good human decision. And I'm getting beeped off again.
Other question? Yes, in the back.
My name is Hussein. I have first a comment about what Father was advocating about the ethics of the church. I think it's laudable and honorable to promote virtue and ethics, but I doubt the practicality in that. I'm going to use one example. Is we are sitting here in this Catholic institution, I could call it that way because it's a Jesuit university, but some of these seats here are not being filled by the people that were not allowed in this institution, right? Meaning that we are here because some of us are paying, including me personally, and the principle that Loyola is using to accept me here is not that of ethic or virtue, rather that of capitalism, meaning that I was amongst a few that competed to get here, and the one with the money to get here is the one that is allowed here. So I could argue that if the church was really, or the church institutions were really advocating for ethics and virtue, why wouldn't they also allow other kids, black or white, who are smart enough to be here but don't have enough money to study here? That's one. The second question is, as a Catholic Church in general, I am surprised every time I look at the images of the Pope of how wealthy the Vatican is. Yet, when you look at the Catholic institution in general, you could argue that there are many places in the world where Catholics are dying. And just as a side note, in my country, for instance, there's been political violence where we're having people flee their homes and go to sleep on the streets. But yet, the Pope or the Catholic institution who value so much ethics and the human condition, they're still living in wealth at the Vatican without even, I could argue, if they could salvage even half of the wealth in Vatican, they could solve a lot of the world poverty. So why don't you walk the walk instead of just talking?
Let me begin this. Is your name Pope Francis?
No, so stand.
No. Excuse me. The reason I say is your name Pope Francis because you're sounding like Pope Francis. That's the very sorts of claims that he is making. He's telling those who are living in wealthy apartments, get out of them. You don't belong here. That's not Christian. That's not fair. He's saying the wealth of the church ought to be, in terms of all of the poor, should be in great part in favor of the poor. So you're sounding just like the Pope. Okay. So I commend you, and I like that. Now let's come back to the situation of Loyola. Again, Loyola does a huge amount of work for people who are indigent. Part of the reason we're going bankrupt, or at least might be going bankrupt, is because of that. Do we do enough? That's a different question. And you can always say not enough. But certainly Loyola has made a valiant effort to take those who can't afford it and find ways in which that they can. So there is some walking of the walk. Would it be nice that it be completely free education? Actually, the Jesuits have that in a high school in New York, but it's hugely endowed. But the rest of us have to do something like, we've got to also pay our bills. And so there's a compromise that goes on there. And I have to admit, it's a compromise.
My turn. Loyola and every other university discriminates in favor of IQ. They have SAT and other entry tests, so even forgetting about money, Loyola and every other university discriminates in favor of smart people, which, according to social justice, I think would be a little incompatible. There'd be at least a tension, if not a hypocrisy. Sostin might sound like Pope Francis, but Pope Francis is the Pope. If he wanted to, I assume he's got the power to sell all these churches. I mean, Loyola has a beautiful church. It's just gorgeous. Most of these Catholic churches are stupendously beautiful, and they're sitting on very, very valuable real estate in New York City. St. Patrick's Cathedral, I don't know how much it's worth. It wouldn't be in the hundreds of millions. It'd probably be in the billions with New York City real estate prices, and they haven't sold it yet and given the money to the poor. Now, look, this hypocrisy is a very serious charge. It means that you're intellectually incoherent. If you adhere to a policy that you admit that you can't follow or you're not following, that's a problem. And Ed doesn't seem to see the power of that as an undermining of his philosophy. I think if you're intellectually honest, what you have to do is, if you can't adhere to your philosophy, you have to change your philosophy, or you have to start adhering to it. As soon as he's got one eye and one kidney, and he doesn't have a nice suit, and I think he's got a wristwatch in there somewhere. As soon as he doesn't have that, then maybe I'll take his views more seriously. But as long as he's a hypocrite, and I use the word in as a friendly way as I can put it. I'm smiling when I say it. But it's true. And he admits it. But he doesn't admit that this undermines his philosophy. I say that as an intellectual, he's morally obligated, not legally obligated. I'm not putting him in jail for not changing his views. But he's morally obligated to change his views because he admits he can't adhere to them. I can adhere to all of my views. I don't engage in murder, rape, theft, threat, whatever. And therefore, I'm not a hypocrite.
Right, and it's 8:35. We have 20 more minutes of questions. In the register, you raised your hand first.
Based on everything that's going on lately with American politics, the past couple of years or so, is there someone in particular that you're endorsing that you feel you're okay with saying, or
I think I go first now.
Yes.
Or do you want to go first?
Will you go ahead?
Okay, I'll go first. I favor Ron Paul. I wish Ron Paul were running again. But of the extant people in the Democrat side, I favor Bernie Sanders, not just because I went to high school with him and I'm his friend. sort of, but because of his views on foreign policy. He's not a neocon. He's not a warmonger. He is, I mean, Hillary is a maniac. Look, I favored my man Barack Obama against McCain because I thought McCain was going to drop a nuclear bomb on somebody. And Chris Christie was, when he was debating, he was asked, well, we have a no-fly zone in Syria. What should we do when Russia breaks it up? And he said, bomb him out of the sky, blow him out of the sky. And Rand Paul quite properly said, if you want World War III, vote for this guy. Well, all the neocons are virulent warmongers, and I would say I favor Bernie vis-a-vis Hillary because Bernie is more peaceful, and foreign policy is much more important than economic policy or personal liberties, because foreign policy kills a lot more people than the other. The other kills people with, motor vehicle accidents and drug laws and stuff like that, but it also determines the economics. And on the Republican side, I favor my man Donald Trump. I started a group called Libertarians for Trump because Trump talks about getting out of NATO. He talks about getting along with Putin, whereas the other people, you mentioned Putin, they start snarling. And he says, we got rid of Gaddafi in Libya, and now it's a mess. We got rid of Hussein in Iraq, and now it's a mess. And now you want to go into Syria? Not on my watch. He wants to pull out troops. He says, why should we have troops in Germany and Japan and South Korea and everywhere else? Nobody else is saying anything like that. So of the two major parties, I would favor those two. And obviously, I'm a libertarian, so whoever the Libertarian Party nominates, I would look very seriously at. Gary Johnson did a great job last time. He's not a perfect libertarian, but I would tend to favor whoever the Libertarian Party nominates.
Father Vosik?
Sure. Once again, when Walter's talking about I'm not consistent, or the church in New York is not consistent. First, I might admit that, but the second thing I want to say is it's always more complex. There are reasons to have big churches and reasons to have prestigious situations in New York. I'm not justifying it. I'm only saying there is another side of the story, and what happens in the Catholic tradition is we hold a whole lot of things. We hold a whole lot of things together. For the liturgy we do here, that I'm going to do in a few minutes, is in an old dental clinic. And that's perfectly fine. And we're going to build another church. So that's the first thing to say is there's more than one value that's involved, and that I want to suggest. Now, with respect to the politics, the reason I say that is because, again, I have different views. I am very strongly in favor of Bernie Sanders. I think his principles are terrific. I will vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, why so? I say so because I'm voting for a politician. I'm not voting for an ideology. And at least you can disagree with me, but I have a stronger sense that Hillary has much better chance of making a difference as a politician, with all the compromise and with all the back door stuff, and with all of her past experience as Secretary of the State, and as all of her experiences being the wife of the former President of the United States, I think she'll get better things, more done than Bernie Sanders, who has a record, as people say to me, of passing almost no legislation. So it's a practical kind of a decision, not an in-principle kind of a decision. And I'm trying to just say there are many things going on, and the same thing in terms of the Catholic Church, in terms of having its big buildings. I don't think we should have all of that rich stuff. Okay, let me be clear. But there is also a need for you got to pay your bills, and you got to have a presence. One of the things about the Catholic Church is
time is up.
Oops.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
And also, for future reference, let's try to keep the questions and comments, of course, more relevant to the question of the debate, which is Catholicism and libertarianism. Out of respect for the people here who came to listen to that. In the hat, and then Janae, you next.
Yes, I want to start off with saying I am an ex-Catholic. I'm a Christian, non-denomination, from my experience in the past with the Catholic Church. But reiterating on a comment that you made about ethics, saying the libertarians didn't have the ethics because they believe in laws and stuff of that sort. I would like to ask you, since the definition more or less of ethics is a set of moral principles, in my experience with the Catholic Church on force and judgment, how can you consider someone who uses force and judgment to force their ways on people? How can you consider that ethically? How can you consider ethics on that if you believe in force and judgment? And you ended your statement saying that a Catholic has to have some minimum amount of ethics. So what are you going to do if they don't? Throw them out?
Father Vasek?
I think that's directed to me.
No way.
You want to defend the Catholic Church?
Oh, I do. And I will as soon as it's my
All right.
turn.
The first thing, it is a common misconception that the language of ethics is forced upon people, imposed upon people. All of that sort of stuff is simply not what Catholic teaching is about. That's the first thing, especially in the area of ethics. It is rather...
People that I had this experience with in power in the Catholic
Oh,
Church.
sure, there's lots of...
Why are they still there? This was priests, this was principals of Catholic schools. Why
Right.
are they still in position if...
Okay, it may be, I mean, I can't defend people that aren't here. So, okay, the second thing I can say is there's also such a thing as teaching. Now, teaching is not forcing, and when one says, oh, killing people is a bad thing, you're not forcing people to not kill. You're saying to them, hey, look again, and you'll see that the killing is not a good thing. So ethics, at least in the Catholic tradition, is not forced upon people, imposed upon people. It's rather, here's the proper way to live. And so it has to do with what is ethics. And ethics is a description of what it means to be a good human being. Just like there's a good knife, and a good knife cuts, a good human being is one who loves the neighbor. A good human being is this. So it's just a description. There is an imposition, but the imposition is internal. Like but I should be a human being. I should be a good human being, and therefore I should take care of, I should love others or do all the other kinds of things that are there. So now, I'm not... So I only want to say that it isn't a matter of imposition. If you've been treated badly, then judgment was the other word.
Force and judgment is okay.
That's the amount of time for his question. So, Dr. Block, it's your turn.
My
to
turn.
answer.
I want to defend the Catholic Church. The main charge against the Catholic Church, I think Larry Bean was mentioning this, is the Inquisition. And nowadays, we don't have the Inquisition. It's been many, many, many years since the Catholic Church has killed anyone over disagreements. Do you know how many people died in the Inquisition? It's unclear, but the best estimates are somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 over several centuries, which works out to very, very few people per year. Now, I'm not saying this is good, but I'm trying to put it in context. Do you know how many people governments killed in the last century? According to Rummel and Courtois and other experts in this, it's 250 million or something like 260 million. I mean, put that into context. And yet the Catholic Church is bashed for, having the Inquisition, properly so. But if you put it in context, they've killed very, very few people. Whereas the state is just a immense murderer. So it's sort of like, I don't know, a mouse and an elephant here. So it's true I'm defending the Catholic Church with faint praise. They're not as bad as the government, but still, I think it's something that we ought to keep in mind because people still think of the Inquisition. When was the last time the Catholic Church killed anyone? I don't know. Now, it's true there have been children abused by Catholic priests, and the higher-ups covered it up, but those people are being weeded out, hopefully, and some of them being put in jail. So I think, okay, this is a black mark against the Catholic Church, but they are acting in a reasonable way. So again, you have to put this in context. And you're talking about people kidnapping women and making them prostitutes. Well, the Catholic Church did it to people even more helpless than adult women, namely children. But they are trying to stop this. So I am defending the Catholic Church. I am defending the Catholic Church and all religion, as I said before. I'm a pro-religious atheist. I don't believe in God, but I think that they are an alternative
Right,
to the government, and I'm finished.
And we have about time for 2 more questions left. Janae, you were next.
You said in determining what libertarianism is, you asked the question, what is just in law? And you went with that you consider what is just in law things that prevent violence against others and that don't violate the person or their property. And you mentioned rape, murder, and theft, which all seem to be physical violations. But I think if we use that definition to determine what should be legal, when we say what doesn't violate a person, we have to ask what comprises a person. And if there are non-physical things that comprise people, then it would follow that it can hurt a person not to help a person. And do you agree? And if so, as that relates to the preferential option for the poor, when you say embracing free enterprise can end poverty, yes, but if physical things are not all we're comprised of, can only free enterprise in poverty?
Well, I guess that I'll start on that one. I think only free enterprise can end poverty. There's no other system that can. But libertarianism is not limited to just physical. Threats. I now threaten you. I'm going to, beat you up if you don't convert to libertarianism. I'm not serious. And if the New York Times is listening, they'd probably say I was serious, but I'm not. I just uttered a threat against you, and that should be against the law too. And yet I didn't hurt you or I didn't physically invade you. I just threatened that I'm going to do that. Well,
because I'm comprised
look,
of more than
libertarianism allows for hurting people. We can hurt people. You have a bakery. You have a bakery. I open a bakery across the street. I take half your customers away. I hurt you, but I have a right to hurt you that way. Or I don't know. Let's say I fall in love with someone's wife and I seduce her away from the husband. I've hurt the husband. Do I have a right to do it? Yes, between consenting adults. So we're allowed to hurt each other in some limited ways, and but it's not just physical because threats are non-physical. And libertarianism also prescribes or would make illegal threats. Look, if I come up with a gun and I say, give me your money or I'll shoot you, and you give me your money, I didn't shoot you, I didn't physically invade you, but I threatened, and that too would be against libertarianism. But don't think that we're against harm or hurt. We only physical harm or hurt would count. Mental harm, I espouse libertarianism. Some people might be hurt by that. They might need a trigger warning or a safe space. I might have hurt them. But I have a right to espouse that view.
But don't you think you would have to tweak the definition from things that violate the person if you're not going to consider all things that violate people?
Well, I think the only thing that violates people is physical invasions or threats. I don't think anything else violates their rights. It can hurt them by competition, but that doesn't count.
I would agree with Janae that there are much bigger hurts that are there, and they're also part of the ethical world. The question for Professor Block is as well, I don't care whether I'm not concerned now about whether they hurt a person personally, only whether they hurt them legally, and legal is defined in a narrow sort of a way. So I'm affirming that there are much bigger hurts, and those are to be worried about. I think what we would find is that we could find such a situation. Professor Block opens this bakery and not only does a much better job, but puts the other person out of business. That person then starves to death, and Professor Block says, not my problem.
All right. You in the black shirt, you've had your hand raised for a few questions. You can have the last question.
So I'm going to try to articulate this well. If Catholic ethics cannot be forced on other people, like you said, how can you justify using Catholic ethics to shape laws that coerce people to behave a certain way?
It's a good question, and once again, it is trying to say that there are certain laws, back to the earlier question, certain moral things that should be legal or illegal. And as soon as you do that, then you're talking about compulsion. But the Catholic contribution is to say this is immoral. It's the political contribution to say this is illegal. And then it is the state that is coercing people to not kill one another or whatever it might be. So it isn't the Catholic Church using its forces, so to speak, to get the government to do its own will. It's rather, if the church is working as it should. Now, in the real world, that's a different matter. But if it's working as it should, it'd say, here's the sorts of things that are really bad for human beings. And now, government, you're responsible for people. You've got some responsibility for the well-ordered society, and government, you should be making the impositions. The Catholic Church, in that sense, has no armies, no force whatsoever, other than moral conscience and trying to tell the truth as it is.
Sometimes the Catholic Church favors Sunday closing laws in many jurisdictions, namely preventing people who don't celebrate the Sabbath on a Sunday from interacting, and I think that's improper. Look, about this baker starving, what about the horse and buggy people? Did they starve when cars came in? What about the people that used to make typewriters? Did they starve when the computers came in? No, this is silly. What about Kodak in Rochester, New York, when little cell phones can take pictures? They all went broke. The only way we're going to have progress is sometimes you have to have bankruptcy. Sometimes if you enter the Baker field, you take your risk. The idea that they're going to starve is preposterous. No, they're freed up to do other things that we now need. The horse and buggy manufacturers were freed up to do other things. Look, at one time we had 98% of the people on the farm. Now we have 2% of the people on the farm. Did 96% of the people starve? No. They're now able to give us many other goods and services. This is the way you cure poverty. If you have the view that people are going to starve if there's bankruptcy, well, that's a recipe for having poverty.
We have only 2 or 3 more minutes left. Do you want to try to fit another question, or would you?
Well, I have to go to church.
So we're going to end then tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and let's give these.